I always thought betrayal came with a warning shot, but mine arrived in a manila envelope, cold and legal. My name is Charlotte Ann, and when my high-powered parents sued me to seize the only home my daughter and I had left, the ornate stone-set Thorne estate became ground zero for a ruthless family war. They called the will of my beloved grandparents flawed and me a greedy liar, trying to erase a legacy of love for a multi-million-dollar land grab. The stakes weren't just financial, they were the very foundation of my daughter's stability and my own hard-won freedom after divorce. Would I be able to defend the truth when the people sworn to love me were determined to bury it? Like, share, comment, and subscribe to our channel. We always appreciate the time you spent here with us. The Thorne estate wasn't just a house, it was a promise. I'm Charlotte Ann, 32 years old, and this sprawling Victorian with its slate roof and widow's walk was my life raft. 5 years ago, after the brutal divorce, I was a wreck, financially exposed and emotionally shattered. Then my grandparents, Elias and Margaret Maggie Thorne, gave me this. Not a loan, not a gift to share, but a legacy left solely to me in their will. They understood that the Thorne estate was more than a multi-million-dollar property in a rapidly gentrifying suburb. It was the foundation I needed to rebuild. My 10-year-old daughter Phoebe had built her entire stable life here. Every creaking floorboard, every window seat, every afternoon spent in the overgrown stone garden was a memory forged in security and love. This was our sanctuary, a symbol of the resilience my grandparents had instilled in me when my real parents, Senator George and Eleanor Vance, were too busy building their political and legal empires to be present. They were high-powered, perpetually absent, and perfectly content to let my grandparents raise me. They had ensured my younger sister Vivian Vance was financially set through other trust funds. She always preferred the city and mocked the house as a dusty old museum. The legacy was clear, the will was airtight, and I lived here safe. That is until Mom passed a comment over the holiday table. "That house is poorly utilized, Charlotte. It's a shame to waste such value on one small family." That single dismissive line was the first drop of poison. The moment I read the words undue influence, a visceral wave of nausea hit me. I slid down against the mahogany front door, the expensive legal paper crinkling under my shaking hands. They were accusing me of exploiting the two people who had loved me most in the world. The betrayal didn't just hurt, it was a physical punch to my core. My parents, Senator George and Eleanor Vance, had weaponized their legal knowledge against their own daughter, challenging the sanctity of my grandparents' final wishes just to seize an asset. I spent that night in the old rocking chair staring at the faded portrait of my grandparents, Elias and Maggie. How could they? The immediate panic was overwhelming. I had no idea how to fight a legal giant like my father. The Thorne estate was mortgage-free, yes, but fighting my parents' resources meant massive legal fees. After 3 frantic, sleepless days, I finally found Julian Hayes, an estate litigation specialist, who was neither afraid of the Vance name nor indebted to my father's connections. Julian's office was stacked high with files, smelling of old paper and fierce determination. He didn't offer false comfort. "Your parents have leverage, Charlotte," he said, reviewing the documents. "They have powerful friends and limitless funds. Their strategy is to bleed you dry legally and emotionally until you agree to settle." I signed the retainer agreement knowing I was trading financial security for a desperate, terrifying fight. The second front in the war opened immediately: the smear campaign. The Vances leveraged every social and political connection they had. My mother, Eleanor, used coded language on her influential social media, talking about the tragedy of family division and greed clouding judgment. Dinner parties and country club gatherings became platforms to paint me as the greedy, manipulative daughter who had taken advantage of her elderly relatives. I was no longer Charlotte Ann, the resilient single mother. I was the selfish heiress hoarding family wealth. The whispers were deafening. Friends I had known since kindergarten suddenly stopped returning calls. The emotional damage began to seep into our sanctuary. Phoebe was the first casualty. She came home from school one day in tears. Vivian's stepchildren, who attended the same dance studio, had spread the rumor that Phoebe's mommy stole the big house and that they would lose everything. Trying to explain adult greed and entitlement to a 10-year-old who still believed in the unconditional love of family felt impossible. "Are Grandpa George and Grandma Eleanor mad at us, Mom?" she had asked, her eyes red-rimmed. That question at us was the one that broke my heart. I pulled her close, promising her stability, promising that our home was safe. But for the first time, I didn't feel sure. My focus turned desperate. I knew the only way to beat a legal lie was with a clear, documented truth. I started a frantic search of the estate's hidden corners. I spent hours in the dusty, echoing attic, rummaging through trunks filled with decades of forgotten memories. I was searching for anything that predated my move-in, anything that proved my grandparents' intent was sound and long established. Old photo albums, wartime letters, and dried flower bouquets blurred together until I felt like I was drowning in the past. It was in Grandpa Elias's old mahogany writing desk tucked beneath a false bottom he had installed decades ago that I found it. A simple manila folder labeled "Estate Matters Thorn" in his precise copperplate handwriting. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside were meticulously organized copies of the original will, the property deed, and most importantly, the attorney-client correspondence from the time the will was drafted. My heart hammered against my ribs as I read through the lawyer's cautious queries and Grandpa Elias's firm, detailed responses. Then I found a letter from their attorney, specifically noting the potential for family conflict given the unequal distribution of the Thorne estate property versus Vivian's trust funds. In the wide margin in Grandma Maggie's spidery handwriting was her answer. The date was over a year before my grandmother's first stroke, disproving any claim of diminished capacity. I scanned the note over and over, absorbing the finality of her truth. "This decision is deliberate. Vivian has been provided for separately. Charlotte has loved this house since she was a girl. She understands its soul. It is her sanctuary, and we want her to have it." The air rushed back into my lungs. It wasn't just a personal vindication. It was legal evidence, a direct refutation of the undue influence claims signed and dated when they were clearly of sound mind. I clutched the paper tears of pure relief and resolve finally falling. It wasn't over, but I now held a small, critical piece of the truth, documented in stone and ink, that proved my parents were lying. The betrayal cut deep, but now I had something to fight with. This correspondence was the only weapon I needed. I just had to hope it would be enough. The first dark chapter was closing, and the real fight was about to begin. The moment I handed Julian Hayes the correspondence from my grandmother, I felt a surge of empowerment, but it was brief. My parents, Senator George and Eleanor Vance, doubled down on their emotional and public assault. The legal papers might be weak, but their public relations game was vicious. The smear campaign intensified, evolving from whispers to outright lies. Vivian went public on a local society blog, not with a formal statement, but an emotionally charged plea. "Charlotte is holding on to family money out of spite. She promised me the house would be sold and split after her divorce." It was an outright fabrication. I had never said that, never even considered it. But the lie was now a matter of public record, given weight by Vivian's carefully constructed image as the wronged sister. The sheer volume of the betrayal was suffocating. I felt like I was being buried alive under a mountain of carefully crafted slander. The worst element, however, was the fear that seeped into the very structure of the Thorne estate. The intimidation tactics started subtly. One evening, the security lights I'd installed flickered mysteriously, then died. A few days later, the anonymous phone calls began. They came late, always from a blocked number, and the voice was distorted, a digital whisper. "Just give up the fight, Charlotte. Save yourself the trouble." Then one night the message chilled me to the bone. "Houses can be dangerous places. Accidents happen. Think about your little girl's safety." The implicit threat that they wouldn't stop at legal harassment was clear. The idea that someone could or would try to physically harm the estate, or worse, Phoebe drove me to near panic. I doubled the security installed motion sensors and started locking every window and door the moment the sun went down. The sanctuary felt like a prison. This climate of fear was the environment in which my daughter Phoebe was forced to operate. I noticed the change in her. She was usually a chatterbox, bright and kinetic, but she grew intensely quiet. She stopped asking about the court case, but she started spending every available moment hunched over her tablet, her fingers flying over the screen. She was always organizing, always clicking, her face illuminated by the cold blue light. She had created a cryptic file folder labeled Insurance and several subfolders labeled Truth. When I asked her what she was doing, she just gave me the calm, unnervingly mature stare of a child who understands too much. "I'm just keeping track, Mom," she'd say, "so we don't forget what people really say." It was a profound and heartbreaking realization my 10-year-old had recognized the dangerous disparity between the adults' public words and their private actions, and she was preparing a defense of her own. She was watching her family implode, and her innate sense of fairness, her resilience was manifesting as a quiet, methodical effort to document the lies. Then came the meeting with Vivian. My sister called, her voice soft and strained, asking to meet for coffee, just us, no lawyers. Weary and desperate for a crack in the granite wall of their resolve, I agreed. She was already visibly pregnant, and she immediately used her condition as a lever. "Charlotte, I'm expecting," she said, her hands cradling her stomach. "Michael and I need a family home. Please, for the sake of your new niece or nephew, just sell. You've had the advantage long enough." I maintained my composure, repeating the core truth: my pregnancy hadn't entitled me to seize anything from her, and her pregnancy didn't entitle her to seize my home. The facade cracked quickly. Her eyes hardened, and she spat out the same manufactured lie. "Everyone knows you played the poor single mom card and promised to sell." The calculation in her eyes was cold and absolute. This wasn't an attempt at reconciliation, but another angle of attack. I left the cafe reeling, feeling sickened by the betrayal. Later that evening, as I was staring at my security feed, Phoebe came into the room, her tablet in hand. She looked at me with an intense gravity that belied her age. "She's lying, Mom," Phoebe whispered. "About the promise." "I know, sweetie, but it's her word against mine." Phoebe simply unlocked her tablet, navigated to the truth folder, and played an audio file. It was muffled, clearly recorded from a distance, but the voices were unmistakable. Vivian and her fiancé Michael, the day after the engagement party, discussing the house. "I just need Charlotte to cave," Vivian's voice hissed. "That old place is disgusting. We're selling immediately. The property value is the only thing we want, not the actual building. The land is worth a fortune." I stared at the screen, speechless. It wasn't the lie itself that shocked me. I knew they were lying, but the meticulous, quiet surveillance my daughter had conducted. "Phoebe," I finally managed. How did you record that?" "I was at their condo to play with Lily," she said, referring to Vivian's stepdaughter. "They were talking loud in the kitchen, but I just held my tablet out and hit record. Grandpa Elias always said, when people's words don't match their actions, you need to pay attention. So I did." The simple, powerful truth of her statement, a distillation of my grandparents' ethical legacy, was a heavy weight. I felt immense pride in her proactive choice and her razor-sharp clarity, but the sadness that my daughter had been forced into this role of clandestine chronicler was overwhelming. She was preparing for a war I was fighting. But the most critical piece of evidence lay dormant on her tablet, waiting. Phoebe, sensing my need for a definitive legal weapon, looked up, her quiet determination shining through. "That's not the best part, Mom. I have a real video. From Christmas. The one Aunt Vivian made." My mind raced. Vivian, an amateur videographer, often recorded family events. "What video, Phoebe?" "The last one," she said, her voice dropping. The Last Christmas at the Estate. It shows them all, Grandma and Grandpa George, Grandma Eleanor, and Aunt Vivian. They all heard it, and they all agreed. It's the truth. That night, for the first time in months, I felt a solid foundation beneath me. The Vances had been ruthless and calculated, but they had underestimated the power of the legacy they were trying to erase, and they had certainly underestimated the quiet, watchful eyes of a 10-year-old girl. We were headed for court, and we weren't going in unarmed. The real arsenal was primed, and it wasn't made of money or legal documents. It was made of cold, hard, documented truth. The revelation of Phoebe's surveillance, while empowering, was immediately countered by the brute force of the Vances' legal strategy. Julian Hayes called me into his office. His expression was grim. "They're escalating, Charlotte. They've submitted their heavy artillery." He slid a document across the desk. Senator George Vance's team had filed a significant new motion. It wasn't just the old, baseless claims anymore. It was an assault of fabricated evidence. They had procured 3 new affidavits from people who barely knew my grandparents, claiming they expressed confusion about their estate plans in their final years. More dangerous was the testimony from my estranged cousin Marcus, who swore under oath that he had overheard me, promised to liquidate the asset and share the proceeds at a family gathering 5 years ago, an outright lie, and a blatant act of perjury carefully designed to support Vivian's public fabrication. Julian sighed, leaning back in his chair. "It's a classic strategy, Charlotte. Throw everything at the wall. They know the undue influence claim is weak, but the verbal agreement makes this messy. It turns the case into a he said she said scenario, which is exactly what they want. They're not trying to win a decisive legal victory. They're trying to create enough ambiguity to force a settlement, and they're winning the time and money war." The financial strain was indeed crushing me. I was pouring what little savings I had into Julian's retainer. My freelance graphic design work suffered. Every moment I wasn't glued to my computer researching estate law, I was dealing with emotional fallout or coordinating with Julian. The fear of failure was compounded by the literal cost of fighting. I was staring at my dwindling bank account, recognizing the terrible truth: I was financing a war against people who had infinite resources. I spent a terrifying week researching high-risk loans, ironically borrowing against the equity of the very house they were trying to seize. The idea of mortgaging my grandparents' legacy, the anchor of our stability, just to defend it, felt like a perverse self-inflicted wound. Julian, seeing the imminent financial ruin, called for another meeting. This time his tone was softer, but his message was harder to swallow than any legal document. "Charlotte, I'm your attorney, and my job is to fight, but it's also to ensure you make informed, rational choices. We have to talk about the out clause." My stomach clenched. The settlement. Yes, the calculated squeeze is working. They are leveraging their resources perfectly. We could fight this to the bitter end and likely win, given your grandmother's letter, but it will take another 18 months and likely another $100,000, which you don't have. They know that. They're betting on your exhaustion." He laid out the proposal, his voice apologetic. "The terms they're tentatively willing to discuss are selling the Thorne estate, yes, but with a significant distribution advantage to you, say 65% to your 35%. It's a pragmatic escape. You'd walk away with enough capital to purchase a smaller, good-quality home outright, you'd avoid further fees, and most importantly, you'd end the family conflict and the immense psychological damage it's inflicting on you and Phoebe." The suggestion, even from Julian, felt like a profound betrayal. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the resilience, the personal freedom, and the love my grandparents had intended. This house wasn't just an asset to cash out. It was the physical manifestation of their trust, my healing, and Phoebe's entire childhood. "No." I heard myself say the word flat and final. "Absolutely not." Julian looked surprised. "Charlotte, consider this carefully. This is a chance for a graceful exit." "There's nothing graceful about surrender. I countered, my voice tight with sudden cold resolve. My grandparents left me this house. They specifically protected me and Phoebe. If I sell it now under duress, I am validating every lie my parents have told and erasing my grandparents' final wish. It's not worth it, not even for temporary peace. The money they're offering is blood money. It doesn't matter if it's 65%. If I walk away, I'm teaching Phoebe that when powerful people lie, the truth is expendable. I will not teach her that lesson. Julian studied me for a long moment, a hint of admiration replacing the earlier concern. Understood. No settlement then. We fight to the last dollar and the last word. I left his office feeling physically lighter, though the legal and financial doom still hung over me. I had refused the easy way out. My agency was intact. I was choosing truth over compromise, freedom over temporary peace. I was choosing the legacy of my grandparents over the toxicity of my parents. When I got home, I found Phoebe hunched over her tablet in the sunroom, the afternoon light glinting off the screen. She looked up, her expression grave, as if she could read the immense pressure I was under. Julian wanted me to sell the house. I told her honestly, sinking onto the nearby ottoman. He said it would end the fight. Phoebe's small body stiffened. "And what did you say, Mom?" I said, "No. We fight for the house. We fight for our home." A slow smile spread across her face, a look of profound relief and triumph. "Good," she whispered. Then she opened her insurance file, her eyes gleaming with sudden purpose. "Because I found the ultimate piece of evidence. You need to see the Christmas video. Aunt Vivian recorded it, but the memory card was on her old laptop when I was playing games on it last year. It's not just audio, Mom. It's visual. It shows them all, Grandpa George, Grandma Eleanor, and Aunt Vivian. They heard Grandpa Elias say it, and they all nodded. They all agreed." The final lie, the lie of ignorance and confusion, was about to be shredded, not by my expensive lawyer, but by a 10-year-old girl and her meticulously guarded tablet. The climax was no longer a grim inevitability. It was a planned surgical strike on the Vance's deceit. The arena was set. The truth was armed. With the court date 2 weeks away, the reality of my refusal to settle hit with cold clarity. We were going to war, and our biggest weapon was 10 years old. I contacted Julian Hayes, immediately requesting an urgent, secure meeting where Phoebe could present her evidence. Julian, ever the professional skeptic, remained guarded, reminding me that evidence gathered by a minor, especially through secret recording, faced severe challenges regarding admissibility. He was preparing for a complicated legal debate, not a cinematic reveal. The meeting was tense. Phoebe sat across the conference table, her small tablet looking almost comical next to the towering stacks of legal briefs. I introduced her as our secret weapon. Julian nodded politely, clearly humoring me, until Phoebe, without preamble, tapped her screen and opened the insurance folder. She started with the video from our last family Christmas at the Thorne estate. The room was warm and festive, the camera steady, clearly operated by Vivian. The whole family was gathered, Grandpa Elias and Grandma Maggie in their armchairs, smiling. Then the audio, Grandpa Elias, his voice clear and strong, speaking to the group. "We want everyone to understand our decisions," he said firmly. "Our house goes to Charlotte and little Phoebe, who have made it their home already. Vivian will receive our investments and the vacation property in Maine. Both of our girls are well provided for in different ways." The camera panned slowly, showing all faces. Senator George Vance, Eleanor Vance, and Vivian Vance were all visible, nodding in calm, apparent agreement. Julian's composure fractured. His pen froze halfway to his notepad. "My God, Charlotte, this is a direct refutation of their sworn testimony. It shows they not only knew but explicitly agreed." Phoebe wasn't done. She navigated to a subfolder labeled Private. She played the audio clip from Vivian's private conversation, detailing her true intent to sell the disgusting house immediately to profit from the land value. Then came the devastating blow, a minute-long audio clip clearly recorded inside the Vance kitchen, capturing a conversation between my parents. It was a clear discussion of their legal strategy. Eleanor's voice. "Richard, you know your parents wanted Charlotte to have the house. We agreed to it at the time." Senator George Vance's voice. "That was before property values doubled in that neighborhood, Eleanor. We were polite then, we are being strategic now. Family resources should be redistributed according to current needs." The clip ended. The silence in the room was crushing. Julian, a veteran of countless brutal estate battles, looked genuinely stunned, his face etched with disbelief. He removed his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "This is extraordinary, Phoebe. This is beyond anything I expected. The Christmas video alone, which was recorded with consent and is legally admissible, demolishes their claim that the inheritance was the result of confusion or vulnerability. It proves premeditated deceit and a direct intent to commit perjury on the part of your parents." He looked at me, his eyes gleaming with a newfound strategic intensity. "This changes everything. We are no longer defending a weak claim. We are prosecuting a lie. Their entire case rests on the idea that they were ignorant or misled. This evidence proves they were neither." The biggest decision remained. Julian laid out the strategy. The physical and audio clips, while powerful, might still be challenged. The most potent move, the ultimate psychological weapon, would be to have Phoebe take the stand. "The rules regarding minors testifying are strict," Julian explained. "But the integrity of her evidence, the methodical way she collected it, the clarity of her purpose, makes her the most compelling witness. She is an entirely independent third party who acted out of an innate sense of justice, not out of adult manipulation. She can narrate the evidence, framing the Vance's actions against her grandparents' legacy." I looked at my daughter. She sat straight, her gaze steady, a small, fierce protector. The betrayal had forced her to grow up faster than any child should, to see the cynical calculus of her grandparents. But she had emerged with a profound agency. "Phoebe," I asked, my voice barely a whisper, "Julian thinks you should testify, to tell the judge how you collected all this and why. It will be terrifying. You will be cross-examined by men trained to break people down. Are you willing to do that?" Phoebe met my gaze without flinching. Her small, mature voice was unwavering. "I want to protect our home, Mom, and I want the judge to know they're lying. Grandpa Elias taught me to stand up for the truth." I choked back a wave of emotion, immense pride mingling with profound sadness. No child should ever have to be this brave. But in the face of my parents' boundless ambition, this was the fight they had forced us into. We had our proof, and we had our witness. The arsenal was primed. We were taking a 10-year-old girl and her tablet into the most ruthless legal arena, prepared to shatter the entire carefully constructed edifice of the Vance family's deception. The courtroom was set to become the stage for a terrifying and absolute climax. The morning of the hearing arrived cold and drizzling, matching the nervous knot in my stomach. The imposing marble columns of the courthouse loomed over us. Phoebe insisted on wearing her dark, sensible dress, her truth uniform, she called it, and she clutched her tablet like a sacred shield. We found our spot in the hallway, Julian Hayes whispering final strategy points when the Vances arrived. Senator George Vance, impeccably tailored and radiating calculated power. Eleanor Vance, wrapped in a designer suit projecting the image of a wrong society matron. And Vivian, pale but deliberately positioned to highlight her pregnancy. They were flanked by a team of 3 lawyers, led by Maxwell Wilson, a man whose reputation preceded him as a master of character assassination. George Vance approached, his politician smile failing to reach his eyes. "Charlotte, this is your last chance for privacy. End this now." Phoebe stepped forward slightly, meeting his gaze with unblinking gravity. "My lawyer said I could bring my evidence, Grandpa George." He scoffed, utterly dismissive of her age, a fatal miscalculation. We filed into the courtroom. Judge Amelia Thorne, sharp-eyed and no-nonsense, presided. The air was thick with tension. Maxwell Wilson started the attack. His presentation was a masterpiece of legal theater, painting my grandparents as confused elderly victims and me as the calculated opportunist. He used Eleanor's carefully coached testimony, where she dabbed her eyes and spoke of her deep sorrow over family division, and George's authoritative testimony citing his own legal experience to argue that the will contradicted their lifelong values of equality. Then came the cousin Marcus, whose perjury about my verbal agreement to sell was delivered with sickening, convincing sincerity. They were closing their trap, sealing the narrative that I was a greedy liar. When my defense began, Julian opted for a strategic, methodical counterpunch. He first introduced the correspondence from my grandmother, Maggie Thorne, the letter, proving her clear intent long before any illness, and the elderly neighbor's surprise testimony, confirming the Thornes' lucidity until their final days. The evidence was strong, but the Judge Thorne's face remained unreadable. She needed more than just testimony. She needed clarity on the motive for the Vances' deception. I took the stand, fighting to keep my voice from trembling. I spoke about the Thorne estate as a sanctuary, as a legacy of love, not as a financial asset. Wilson's cross-examination was brutal. He hammered at my post-divorce financial instability, suggesting I was desperate and thus ripe for manipulation. Did you not strategically move in with your ailing grandmother to secure the asset, Ms. Anne? Did you not, despite your current protestations, promise your sister the equity would be shared once you were stable? I held firm, denying the lies, affirming my grandparents' explicit wishes, but I knew my words were just one fragile voice against the weight of my parents' wealth and influence. The moment came. Julian took a long, steadying breath. The defense calls our final witness. We request permission to call Phoebe Vance to the stand. The courtroom exploded. Maxwell Wilson was on his feet instantly, his face flushed. Your Honor, the minor child is not a proper witness. This is a bald-faced attempt to manipulate the court's sympathy. Judge Thorne cut him off with a look. The court is capable of assessing the credibility of all witnesses, Mr. Wilson. The child is permitted to testify, but I caution counsel to keep the testimony brief and relevant. Proceed. Phoebe walked to the witness stand. She looked impossibly small in the high wooden chair, but she carried herself with the poise of a seasoned professional. She was sworn in her small hand on the Bible, her voice a clear bell. I am Phoebe Ann Vance, and I am 10 years old. Julian spoke softly. Phoebe, do you understand why we are here today? Yes, sir, she said, looking straight at the judge. My grandparents and aunt are trying to take our home because they want the money, but my great-grandparents wanted us to have it. Phoebe, do you have something you wish to show the court? Yes, Your Honor. Can I show you what my Grandpa George and Grandma Eleanor don't want you to see? The courtroom froze. Judge Thorne nodded slowly, a flicker of genuine interest in her eyes. You may, young lady. Phoebe calmly set up her tablet. The court clerk connected it to the audio-visual system. The screen lit up with the title, The Truth About Our Home. Phoebe narrated the opening, her voice unwavering. I made this video. It shows what people said before they decided to sue us. The first clip played the legacy confirmed. It was the last family Christmas at the Thorne estate 5 years ago. Grandpa Elias, vibrant and healthy, stood by the mantel. The camera, operated by Vivian, panned to the Vances, all present and smiling. Grandpa Elias. We want everyone to understand our decisions. Our house goes to Charlotte and little Phoebe, who have made it their home already. Vivian will receive our investments and the vacation property in Maine. Both of our girls are well provided for in different ways. The camera held on Senator George Vance, Eleanor Vance, and Vivian, all of whom were clearly seen, nodding in full explicit agreement. The lie of confusion, the lie of unequal provision, shattered in the span of 30 seconds. Eleanor's carefully applied foundation seemed to drain from her face. George Vance's jaw locked. The clips came next, relentless and surgical. The land value lie audio from Vivian's private call. That old place is disgusting. We're selling immediately. The land value is the only thing worth anything, not the house itself. This immediately countered her sworn testimony that she simply wanted a family home and exposed her motive as pure financial greed. The verbal agreement lie. A video clip recorded by Vivian herself for a family anniversary montage showed Senator George Vance with his arm around my shoulders, telling a guest, "The house was entirely hers because my mother wanted her to have it specifically." This annihilated the entire verbal agreement claim. The strategic confession. The last clip was the quiet, damning recording from the Vance kitchen. Eleanor Vance's voice clear and cold. "Richard, you know your parents wanted Charlotte to have the house. We agreed to it at the time." George Vance's cynical low retort. "That was before property values doubled in that neighborhood, Eleanor. We were polite then. We are being strategic now. Family resources should be redistributed according to current needs." This was the motive, the personal betrayal, and the cynical, calculated assault on our security captured for all the world to hear. The courtroom was utterly silent, the only sound the faint whir of the playback system. My parents and sister sat frozen, their deception laid bare for the court and the public record. Phoebe looked directly at Judge Thorne. They all knew. They all agreed. They're not telling the truth now. Wilson jumped up desperate. "Your Honor, this evidence should be excluded. These recordings were made without consent, some potentially in violation of privacy laws." Judge Thorne raised a hand, silencing him. "I am aware of the legal issues, Mr. Wilson. However, the Christmas video alone, which was clearly created with the consent of all present, directly and definitively contradicts your client's central claims regarding the testator's confusion and the family's supposed lack of knowledge. Furthermore, the volume and consistency of this secondary material strongly suggest a pattern of premeditated deceit and raises grave concerns about the truthfulness of sworn testimony." She turned back to Phoebe, her expression now softened with admiration. "Did anyone ask you to make these recordings, young lady?" Phoebe shook her head firmly. "No, Your Honor. I did it because my great-grandpa told me when people's words don't match their actions, you should pay attention. So I did. I wanted to protect our home." "Thank you, Phoebe. You may step down." As Phoebe returned to her seat, clutching my hand, Judge Thorne addressed the room, her voice a hammer blow. "In light of this new evidence, particularly the video documenting the explicit intentions of the testators in the presence of all parties and the clear contradictions of sworn testimony, the court is calling a 30-minute recess. Counselors, I want to see you in my chambers immediately." As the judge swept out, the courtroom erupted in a low, furious murmur. The Vances huddled with their attorneys, their faces ashen, gesturing wildly at the tablet. Their calculated power had just been dismantled by a child's truth. It was in the hallway that Senator George Vance approached our table. His expensive suit suddenly looked like a costume. His authority had evaporated. "That was quite a performance, Emma," he said, his voice flat with defeat. "You've been very thorough." "I just showed what really happened, Grandpa," Phoebe replied, her composure unwavering. Before I could speak, Julian returned from chambers. His eyes were bright with triumph. "It's over, Charlotte. The judge has major concerns about potential perjury and has strongly advised them to settle immediately. They are proposing to withdraw the case entirely, no contest, no conditions, full acknowledgement of your ownership in exchange for you not pursuing any counterclaims or reporting their conduct for investigation." I blinked, the exhaustion momentarily forgotten. Total victory. They're giving up. Phoebe's evidence, specifically the admissible Christmas video, undermined their entire position and exposed their motive. They know if this continues, they face professional ruin and possible criminal referral. You won. We returned to the courtroom for the final formality. Maxwell Wilson, defeated, presented the settlement proposal: full withdrawal of all claims, acknowledgement of the will's validity, and a non-disparagement agreement. As I signed the documents, I felt no elation, only profound relief, and a crushing sadness for the destruction of my family. Before adjourning, Judge Thorne addressed Phoebe one last time. "Young lady, your courage and commitment to truth are commendable. The justice system relies on facts, not just what people claim. You demonstrated remarkable awareness for someone your age." As we prepared to leave, Vivian approached no longer the calculating sister, but a visibly shaken pregnant woman. "Phoebe," she whispered, "that was impressive. I didn't realize you were paying such close attention." Phoebe looked at her aunt, the wisdom of the Thorne legacy shining through her eyes. "Adults forget that kids are always watching and listening, Aunt Vivian, even when they pretend not to be." We walked out of the courthouse into the weak afternoon sunshine. Our home was secured, our personal freedom defended. But the family relationships were fundamentally, perhaps irrevocably altered by the searing light of the truth. The climax had passed, leaving behind the wreckage of betrayal and the quiet triumph of a child's courage. The drive home from the courthouse was silent, the silence of exhaustion, not reconciliation. The weak afternoon sun struggled through the clouds, a symbolic shift that felt incomplete. We were driving back to the Thorne estate now, unequivocally ours, its ownership legally protected by the judge's final order, yet the victory felt profoundly hollow. I turned to Phoebe, her face pale but calm. "How are you feeling, sweetie?" She considered the question with the gravity of a 100-year-old. "Relieved, Mom, but sad. I thought winning would feel better." I reached across the seat and squeezed her small hand, a fierce surge of love and gratitude washing over me. "It's complicated, honey. When you're fighting family, there's no real winning, only surviving." The next few months were dedicated to renewal and healing. I threw myself into the physical work of reclaiming our space. I started the renovation project I'd postponed, turning the dusty old sunroom into a bright, airy art studio for Phoebe. The physical labor was cathartic, an outlet for the lingering anger and confusion the lawsuit had left behind. The legal victory came at the cost of our family. Vivian was the first to reach out 3 months after the case concluded. A handwritten envelope arrived, my name scrawled on the front. I hesitated, bracing for another attack, but inside was a genuine raw apology. She admitted her jealousy not just of the house, but of the stable life and the relationship I had with our grandparents. She admitted her fear, which she had allowed to poison her actions. "I let that jealousy and fear of being left behind consume me," she wrote. "I don't expect forgiveness, but my child deserves to know their amazing aunt and cousin." I showed the letter to Phoebe, who read it carefully. "I think she means it," Phoebe observed. "Being pregnant changes perspectives. Now she understands what a home means." After much deliberation, I accepted a path to a slow, neutral ground reconciliation. Our first meeting at a downtown cafe was stiff and awkward, focused only on her pregnancy and Phoebe's schoolwork. The lawsuit was a gaping chasm between us, but a tiny thread of sisterhood remained, centered around the idea of a future for her baby James. Senator George and Eleanor Vance were a more complex, prideful matter. They made no attempt at a direct apology, their pride wounded by the public exposure of their deceit, and the judge's veiled threat of investigation kept them silent. They did, however, send a formal card for Phoebe's 11th birthday with a generous check, a clear signal of their desire to maintain a boundary-based relationship without admitting fault. Phoebe, ever the keen observer, studied the card. "They're trying, Mom," she noted, placing it on the mantelpiece. "They just don't know how to say sorry. Being angry takes too much energy, and they're missing out on so much by not being part of our lives. That's punishment enough." The arrival of baby James, a tiny red-faced boy, completed the cautious turn toward renewal. Our relationship with Vivian progressed to supervised monthly visits on neutral ground. The first time Phoebe held her cousin, her face softened with pure, uncomplicated joy. "He has Grandpa Elias's chin," she whispered. That winter, my parents finally broke their silence. They arrived unannounced on the front porch, stiff and awkward, holding a holiday gift basket. There was no apology but an undeniable expression of their desire to move forward. For Phoebe's sake and for my own emotional peace, I accepted this imperfect olive branch, establishing new firm boundaries. No discussions of money, no unsolicited visits, and zero tolerance for any future manipulation. Our personal freedom to live without the shadow of their ambition was now non-negotiable. As spring arrived, Phoebe and I went out to the sprawling stone garden, the part of the estate my grandparents loved most. We planted a young cherry tree, a symbol of our own new beginning and the continuity of the Thorne legacy. As we patted the soil around its roots, I looked at the grand, silent house. "Do you think Great-Grandma and Great-Grandpa would be happy with how everything turned out?" I asked. Phoebe wiped the dirt from her hands, looking up at the budding branches. "I think they'd be sad about the fighting, Mom, but they'd be proud of how we handled it, especially you. I just did what Grandpa Elias taught me, pay attention and stand up for what's right." "You did that and more, my love," I promised, wrapping my arm around her. "You protected our home." Later that evening, sitting on the porch swing my grandfather had built decades earlier, I reflected on the meaning of our Thorne estate. It was a vessel for memory, a testament to resilience, and a foundation for our future. The betrayal had been an awful fire, but it had forged an unshakable bond of truth and love between me and Phoebe. The old house stood solid now, truly and unequivocally ours, not just by legal deed, but by the virtue of courage and the unwavering clarity of a child's testimony. We were free. The thing about homes, I told Phoebe, leaning my head against hers, is that they're built on love and truth, not just legal ownership. And we take care of each other no matter what. Phoebe finished the final perfect line of our story. And so Charlotte Ann closed the painful legal chapter, securing the Thorne estate, not just with legal papers, but with the pure truth defended by her daughter. If this story of betrayal and resilience resonated with you, hit the like button and subscribe for more deep dive dramas. Let us know in the comments what you would have done in Charlotte's place. We read every single thought you share. Thank you for listening. This has been a story from Radiance. We'll see you next time.